Well, hello everyone. This is Alligator. Alligator in alignment. We've got a wonderful show today, sort of a different subject than what we usually do. I got a new friend of mine, Nate Kanye. Anyway, we're going to get into some really interesting subjects. But I'm going to give you a precursor of one of the shows coming up. I always do music in the beginning of my shows, as you know. I'm going to do music by a gentleman named Stephen Foster. I'm forgetting his name. Hey, I'm old. Stephen Foster. He was the Cole Porter of the Lennon McCartney of the 1800s. All of the music, the popular music of that era, he was writing Oh Susanna, Oh My Darling Clementine, Camptown Ladies, and Hard Times, which is a wonderful song, Hard Times. You got to hear it. But anyway, I'm going to start off with a Stephen Foster song. This song was wrote in 1843. And I'm going to do it for you right now, okay? Alligator style. Oh, yeah. With my guitar on my knee, Lord, I'm headed up to California, Lord, my true love, I'm gonna see. I said, oh, Susanna, I said, don't cry for me, I said, oh, Susanna, I said, don't cry for me, don't cry for me. Now what I say about Stephen Foster is I think he hang out with the indigenous Americans and did a little thing called peyote, which I'm well familiar with. Because the man wrote some strange lyrics. He was high on something. Listen to this. Well, it rained all night on the day I left. Lord, the weather sure was dry. What? The sun was so hot, I nearly froze to death. Oh, Susanna, what was he smoking? Don't you cry. I said, oh, Susanna, I said, don't cry for me. I said, oh, Susanna, I said, don't cry for me, don't cry for me. Oh, Susanna, don't cry for me. I said, oh, Susanna, I said, don't cry for me, don't cry for me. One more time. Like I said, he was smoking something. One more time. I said it rained all night on the day I left. Lord, the weather sure was dry. The sun was so hot, I nearly froze to death. Oh, Susanna, don't you cry. Oh, Susanna, don't cry for me. I said, oh, Susanna, I said, don't cry for me, don't cry. Susanna, Stephen Foster. Right now, I'd like to bring on my guests. Our guests, I got my co-host, my son, Cowboy Don, is here with me today again. And let's have Nate Kanye.
Close enough.
Kanye. Anyway, that's close.
Close enough.
You know what I mean.
Yeah.
I speak gibberish. But we're going to be dealing with some very interesting subjects today. Tell us a little bit about yourself, my friend.
So, my name is Nate Kenya. So we got pretty close on that one. It's all good. It's actually funny. People have been saying it wrong my whole life. No one can get it right. I don't think it's that hard of a name to say. It's Polish.
Listen. People, my name's Alligator. You think people would remember that?
Pretty memorable name. I mean, I don't know why. You might be my first alligator.
People call me Crocodile all the time. And I'm going to tell you something else.
It's a different lizard.
I lived on Maui for 3 years, from 1973 to 76. I left on the same day that I arrived, 3 years later. When I got ready to leave, I was packing up my car and somebody said, Alligator, do you got everything? And my next door neighbor, who had spoke to me every day for 3 years, was stunned. She said, your name is Alligator? I said, yes. She says, I've been saying good morning avocado for 3 years. I said, I just decided not to say anything.
Yeah.
So believe me.
I said you see something, say something. Yeah. So we're in my spot here in beautiful Sausalito. Y'all can't see it, but there's a great little view of the bay out there.
100%.
Wonderful, calming water. So good spot. I've lived in the Bay Area about 2.5 years. I'm from Boston originally, although I like to say I'm from Vermont because parents live up there now, and that's a fantastic state. I don't know if you guys have been. We're going to be talking about some interesting stuff today. For my work, I work in the technology sector, not too surprisingly. It's kind of the days, and I think technology is an interesting subject because it gives us a whole lot of tools, or it can cause a whole lot of problems. And I think we're going to be talking about some of the problems that it causes, but maybe how we can start to get ourselves in the right mindset to start to use some of the tools. I think that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. We're just going to kind of talk about a moment in time, where there's a infinite amount of time behind us and an infinite amount of time ahead of us, but we're right here right now, and we're going to come at that and talk about it from a couple different angles and just kind of see where that leads.
Yeah, one of the things that I was talking to Christina about the other day was that when I was coming up as a young man, into adulthood, it was very common for policies to be made and things were done with a idea of the future generation. Everything was done for the generations to come. Everything was done that way. And now I've slowly watched that disappear. And now everything is done for instant gratification.
Right.
People are not thinking of the next generation. Climate change being a really excellent example.
Mm-hmm.
We know what the scientists are saying, and we know now that you can't call it maybe.
Mm-hmm.
These are certain things. But yet and still, people are thinking about their instant gratification, about me, how much money did I make and all this stuff, and they aren't thinking about, am I going to leave the next few generations with an earth that we can even live in comfort on?
Mm-hmm.
That's not even thought of anymore.
Well, I was talking to Nate a little bit the first time we sort of interacted, and we were talking about this idea of, us being in a time where we just look at such a small snapshot of the big picture, especially, time-wise.
Mm-hmm.
And climate change came up, and I remembered a book I read. It was by not George Martin, but a book I read in college. It doesn't matter who it's by. But basically the message is we physiologically, evolutionarily, however you want to describe it, we have a trouble looking at problems that we can't see or hear or feel or taste or smell. You know what I'm saying? We have trouble with those intangible things that we know will affect us in the future. Like we can sit down, we can analyze it, we can figure it out, but for us to empathetically connect with it and act on it, it's really difficult for us as humans, just in our nature. Now where climate change comes into play with this is the effects are so small and it's easy to not worry about what's going on in Houston or in the Cayman Islands or somewhere that's so far away, but or in the future, 100 years in the future, as we're talking about. It's it's a problem that's just difficult for us to internalize and conceptualize, but because of that, by the time real tangible consequences of our actions, materialize, manifest, it's a little bit too late. Now, one place where we were able to see something and make a change was with the ozone layer.
For sure, that's actually no one talks about the ozone layer.
Well, because we didn't solve the problem, but we made huge steps. I think it was I'm going to butcher the CFCs. Chlorofluorocarbons. Yeah.
I used to have a joke in my science class. We learned about those. It was my 9th grade science class, and whenever the science teacher would ask anything like, "Why is this?" we'd always say chlorofluorocarbons, for the whole year, and it just drove him absolutely nuts. I think I got detention for it or something. It got bad enough, but yeah, you're right. The CFCs from styrofoam, from refrigerants, from a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, those were aerosols a lot.
Yeah, aerosols. That's another big one.
Those were something that we went from whatever amount we were emitting to 1% of that amount in 10 years. Between I think the late 90s and the early 2000s, and now we don't hear about the ozone layer, and some naysayers I've heard have said well, this was a big deal, now it's not a big deal anymore. Obviously it doesn't matter. Maybe climate change is more blown up than it needs to be. And the reality is we made these big changes globally, not just here in America, and now we don't see an accelerated rate of this whole growing. In fact, we see the the global climate naturally
Well, it is
fixes
actually
itself.
part of the ecosystem. I mean, all this stuff is alive and in communication, but
Right.
I mean, climate change. So we're
trying to be more specific.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Climate change is one of the 5 topics that I wanted to talk about to kind of intersect us into this moment in time here where we are.
Right.
But I do think that point of the aperture getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and just looking right in front of us, and I think there are reasons just from a pure values perspective that I don't like that, but also just from a happiness perspective. I mean, this is the thing that confuses me about it. And the first time we talked, we were saying, there's so many kind of angry people out there. There's so much negative emotions, and as we get into kind of this point of technology and what it unlocks or the trouble it can cause, a lot of that is driven by technology because we're plugged into a device that literally is eating our brain essentially, and taking our attention span and trying to chop it up into smaller and smaller pieces to sell it to the highest bidder.
Well, I actually heard somebody compare. They said we sort of colonized the world to an extent as humans, but now we're sort of trying to colonize time or people's attention spans. And I thought that was a really interesting way to sort of paint the picture of the way that we interact with technology today, where so many companies, not bad necessarily, but the job is to try to get as much of our attention throughout the day or throughout the week or whatever unit of time as possible.
And what's interesting about that too, and I want to frame up our project and stuff, but we can keep going on this topic because I'll talk about that all day. Is a lot of what these algorithms are done, they're designed with a purpose, and the technology isn't good or bad. In many ways, I think maybe it's good, but technology is kind of neutral. It's like any other tool, right? A hammer can be great if I'm building a house and terrible if I'm murdering somebody.
Right.
And that's kind of how technology works too. And these algorithms are actually, and we were talking about this earlier, they're designed to trigger us and get that attention primarily by preying on negative emotions like anger and fear and defensiveness.
Well, I would almost say that rather than being intentionally targeting these fears, I think the job of these algorithms is to get as much time per user, get as many interactions per minute, and I think it's just the natural sort of evolution of these algorithms to target these sort of emotions because that's what elicits the most.
But my point is one of the things that these algorithms have done. And one of the things that I kind of want to see how we can break away and find some commonality from is they've created a very high amount of polarization because they've created these different camps. And you could design an algorithm to do the exact opposite. You could design an algorithm to facilitate people with different ideas coming together in a productive setting. Now there are a whole host of reasons why that's not what's going on right now, but this is just my point to kind of point out. And climate change is an area, but there are many other areas where we actually have so many amazing tools at our disposal to do some really cool stuff. And part of what I want to talk about today is how do we kind of start to move in that direction? Because in some ways, this is a scary time for a lot of people. I don't find it scary, but it's really exciting. I mean, we might be on the verge of something that's really special here,
I think so as well. Can you elaborate on that? What do you think we could be on the verge of things? Because I think we're almost at a crossroads. I think we could be on the verge of really great things, and I think also, just like as you said, the hammer could either be good to build or bad to break.
Mm-hmm.
I think we could also be, I'm not a woe's me guy. I'm personally not subscribed to one way or another, but I definitely think we're at a crossroads where we as a people could come together and move in positive directions, especially in the context of technology and time. But I also think that if we sort of remain complacent, and as a whole, as a society, sort of allow things to just kind of happen, similar to how that algorithm pulls out the negative emotions because that's what sort of feeds it financially. I think technology can kind of be used to do the same thing if left to its own devices.
We're not letting our old man get a word in here at all, huh? What do you think?
No. The reason a lot of these media sites, they make their money off of negative.
100%.
I learned as a young man, as a young child back in the 40s or whatever, 50s, if you gossip, if something comes out that's negative about somebody in the community, it spreads like wildfire. Everybody wants to tell somebody about it.
Mm.
But if we find out that particular subject that everybody's spreading around wasn't true, when that is found out, all of the people who were spreading this negative thing all over the community, none of them will go back and spend the energy they spent spreading it to correct it. Negative things have a life of their own, and they will spread like wildfire. And that's the thing with the internet, is that a lot of these, I watch a lot of podcasts and things, and the more outrageous and the more misinformation that they spread, the more conspiracy theories, the higher their
the higher the ratings are, the further the reach spreads, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing about the internet from somebody from my age group looking at it, is that the internet is an absolutely wonderful thing. I mean, wonderful, but it has a dark side, like everything else. And that dark side is there's the division that's going on in this world now. We need a counter point to it, which I hope you are trying to present also. You know,
almost a counterculture.
Yes.
Well, I think a lot of it, it's funny. Neil deGrasse Tyson. You guys know Neil deGrasse Tyson, right?
Yeah.
You ever watch that show Hot Ones on YouTube? It's celebrities eating increasingly spicy hot ones. He actually hot wings up to like 2 million Scoville units.
While being interviewed.
Interviewed, and he actually wins. He maintains his whole Neil deGrasse Tysonism throughout the whole thing, and the host is like dying, but he has a quote somewhere in there. He's like, the guy asks him, do you ever get tired of like debunking, how much are you debunking conspiracy theories, and like tell us some of that? And he's like, no, like my role is like I'm an educator. Like I'm working on, and what I try to do is I try to create a scenario where people have the tools and the education such that the conspiracy theories or the bullshit or whatever just like doesn't stick. And then he has another quote in there where he's like, the problem with the internet, it's amazing, but it came about before we had like the educational baseline to know when somebody's full of shit. And then he's got one more thing, just to quote the man, where he talks about, it's not that it's made people crazier, but because everything is indexed and everything is searchable, you can have some crazy idea and you can type it into Google and you can go and find everybody else that believes that exact same thing,
Right. Yeah, the problem with Google is really, however you phrase the question, you'll find something that supports or affirms that.
For sure.
And so it's like, a really good example of this is there's these graphics that go around, regardless of your political affiliation, you'll find this interesting. There's these graphics that go around that have this like long list of what like Donald Trump did, and then like these 3 things that Joe Biden did. And then on the other hand, there's like a long list of like what Joe Biden did and a very short list of what he did or non-successes of the other guy. And it's so funny because if you were to search all of these the way they're worded, you'll find it exactly, supporting exactly what that is. But if you search it to the antithesis of whatever that statement is, you'll find that to be true as well.
Opposite, yeah.
And so it's, I can understand why a lot of people find it easy to fall into these traps, these echo chambers where, people are saying the same thing and like you look it up the way they say it and it confirms it. But at the same time, it's really interesting that Neil deGrasse and yourself say this, that the internet came before we were educated enough to use the internet. And I think that's a good point.
Yeah. Oh yes. Yeah,
But to get back to our original topic, I find it really interesting that both these gentlemen independently were talking about looking at this, especially like media sources like the newspaper or cable news. They happen to look at such a small segment of the bigger picture. Like Dad, you were saying back in the day, it was always, policy was always written with the future in mind, with future generations in mind.
Generations.
And Nate, you were saying that you think it would be a lot more important to look at news through the context of a broader scale of what happened 100 years ago that's affecting what's happening today, and how what happens today, the policies that are put forth, and the general trends of the population, how that will affect us 100 years in the future.
I'd be interested to hear.
Could you expand upon that?
Yeah. Well, so I think another point on, even if you think of like digital versus analog, digital chops everything up into a unit, a bite-sized 1 or 0.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that has the effect of doing is it obliterates continuity.
Mm-hmm.
In an analog world, everything is constantly connected to itself, whereas in a digital world, everything has to be broken apart, and you can get it to like a super high level of resolution so that you don't notice it, but there is this like breaking apart of continuity that happens. And I think like as we kind of talk about, time and these topics of how do we have a broader perspective on what's going on, we can interact with the news story, we can interact with the tweet, we can interact with the newspaper, and it creates this illusion that this is like something immediately that's changed or that happened like totally out of the blue, independent of the context and the characters that were part of that story well in the past and will be well in the future. So all these things are kind of moving in a continuous direction. And I originally thought, let's just pick a newspaper and kind of pick some articles. And I'm a big stories guy. I have a journalist training, even though that's not what I do anymore, although it's super helpful. And to me, it's always about what's the story and like who are the characters and what's the intrigue. Mm-hmm. And I just find a much more enduring and helpful way to make sense of the world. And then it's just about kind of expanding the aperture a little bit, expanding the time horizon over which we're thinking about something like, the couple topics that I proposed here and I wrote them down that I wanted to use to kind of anchor our discussion. We talked about one of them, which is climate change.
Right.
One of them is the Ukraine war. And there's news articles on that every day, but then there's just kind of the broader picture of, what do those news articles mean, either in the context of a war that's been going on for 9 months, mm-hmm. or in the context of what that war kind of implies and, what came before and after.
100%. Do you want to touch on that for a little bit?
Well, so I want to frame up the kind of 5 topics to get us an anchor, and if we want to propose some different ones. But so I've got climate change, I've got the Ukraine war, I've got these protests that are going on, and I don't know how much folks are paying attention to those. Some maybe, some may not.
You're talking about the ones in
China and Iran. Yeah, so the ones in Iran have been going on for a couple weeks now. China actually I picked up a copy of the Sunday Times, there wasn't even any coverage of it, so it's super recent, and both of those regimes are very authoritarian. They've really censored a lot of the news getting out, but there's still enough news getting out that you can kind of put some dots together there. One is the economy. Because that's a hot topic for everybody. Everyone wants to put food on the table. The economy's stupid, as Bill Clinton said, for, why you win elections. And then the last one is the U.S. midterms. And I don't want to get like super political about that, but it is kind of like a uniquely American kind of way that a lot of these dynamics interact. And I think there's some interesting takeaways, largely positive ones, I think, not necessarily because of the political outcome, more that we didn't kind of self-combust. Mm-hmm. And I think we should all, regardless of what we think of the outcome, we should congratulate ourselves there.
Yeah, man. Well, it's really interesting to see how all these things sort of come together to create, the world we're living in today. But it is really easy to sort of zero in on these things that are happening and not take context. Like for the Ukraine war, for example, mm-hmm. is a really good benchmark for that.
Yeah, you can continue. I'm just going to try to pull some examples here while you're talking.
Yeah. Like, you look at the Ukraine war going on today, and you say, oh, this is terrible, this country's invading this other country. Of course it is, it shouldn't happen like that. Yes. But a lot of people don't take into context, and I'm not defending it. Stick with me for a little bit, people. I'm not defending Russia and it means...
You're going to piss off the algorithm.
No.
The algorithm's going to sniff you out.
What I'm saying is if you look... A lot of people say, oh, I don't know why somebody would do that, that's so crazy. But if you look into the history of this part of Europe, you'll see, there's always been sort of a sense of this is our land, these are our people, we want to conserve it.
Well, yeah, you have an imperialist power in
Right.
Moscow
Right.
that has at various times, invaded and annexed.
Invaded
that
and
whole
annexed and
region,
then
including
repelled.
Ukraine, which was part of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, but
Kind
so
of
is
against their will, but was part of the Soviet Union until 92, 94, something like that.
90, yeah, I think 94.
Yeah, 94. Yeah.
But like I was saying, if you don't look into the context of why people are doing it, you're just going to understand that, you're not going to understand that this isn't just some crazy dude. There is at least a little bit of idea behind it,
He's
right?
a crazy dude.
Not just, I didn't say he's not a crazy dude, I said not just a crazy dude. But then, you have to look in a little bit further, right? So for the past 60 years, for the most part in Europe, there's been sort of a live and let be paradigm that we don't really want to change up because, back in the 1940s, when that stopped, a lot of bad things happened. And so when you're just focused on, what happened today, what happened this week, what even happened this year, you sort of lose a lot of why something happens and what that could potentially lead to in the future. Another good example of this is Russia's military policy of escalating to de-escalate, right? So many people are like, oh, we should send all these people to Russia, which, I may agree with or do not agree, but you have to at least understand the context. Like, that might not, even though NATO or the West may have like the military power to handle business, supporting Ukraine is a little bit better because you keep us from escalating, which would in turn not de-escalate the situation, but cause a reaction from this. And I say all this to say, these are things that I've never read in a paper. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? These are things I've never seen on TV verbatim, or at least all put together. But for somebody that doesn't have any experience with history or experience with this part of Europe, this is context that would give so much more depth to your understanding of the situation. But for some reason, it doesn't make big headlines and it doesn't get people excited. I don't know, it doesn't get people angry and writing on message boards. So, it's something that's kind of left up to the reader or the viewer to find for their own. Is this a similar experience that you guys have had?
What do you think, Alligator?
My attitude about this thing is Ukraine, regardless to the past, whether it was a part of Russia or not,
Obviously doesn't want to be
Ukraine
it today.
is a separate sovereign country, and if Mr. Putin decides that he wants to reclaim the Russian Empire, that tells you a lot there.
Yeah, but I'm not really talking about the Russian Ukraine conflict itself, but more like the information that you see about it versus the information that really would add to your understanding of it.
That's definitely an angle. But I think what you were kind of getting at, Alligator, was like some of the context, what it means.
And wrong is wrong. That's it.
Right.
And somebody said, well, it used to be a part of Russia, so blah, blah, blah. But we used to be a part of Britain.
Right.
So what do? When there's a civilized society, and when Ukraine is a sovereign country, and regardless to what all the existential things are, the fact is their country has been invaded. And there's no other way to look at it.
So here's how I kind of put, if we take the 100-year story and let's go 100 years in the future and let's start 100 years in the past. So let's just take World War II as our starting point here, or maybe a bit before World War II. World War II is the last time that we had real, imperialism in like a land war in Europe.
In Europe, yeah.
In Europe. Not the other parts of the world, we're not used to conflict in Europe and the US in the same way that, someone in South America or Asia or Africa would be for sure. That's a totally different topic that we could break into. But, starting in, I think World War II, what happened is you had a lot of apathy, even some support. And there was support, in America and in Europe and stuff for Putin, a lot more before he started this war and he's doing things like shelling cities. But he had big fans in the U.S. I mean, he had Tucker Carlson was a big fan of him. He's one of the largest audiences of anybody. Yeah. So he had his, and Hitler had fans too in the U.S. back in the day. So if we kind of just start how that happened, we had apathy that allowed it to emerge, and at a certain point, that apathy, because we weren't paying attention to it and we weren't on the ball, got so big and so gnarly that the whole world had to go to war over it, and millions of people died. In fact, 27 million Russians actually died in World War II. Right. And they fought on two different sides. So that's World War II. And then after World War II, you kind of had this, and it gets to the thing that you were saying, Alligator, about how somehow we've lost context of future generations. If you look at when America was founded, there are a lot of problems with the way America was founded for sure, but it also, there were some great things about it. It was deeply aspirational. If we wanted to build this land forever.
A lot of the feelings that were created in that independence and just the whole formation of America sort of still stay strong in the zeitgeist of the culture in America today. This whole Minuteman ideology, or don't tread on me and the guns and stuff like that. It's still things that are prevalent in our culture today. Mm-hmm. And it was, 240 some odd years ago.
Yeah, but so where I was kind of going with this is, we had this apathy, and then we came out of World War II, and certainly in America, we could take over the world, and it's going to loop into some of the other topics that we brought up, and somehow we just kind of got, we had this whole growth of neoliberalism, which is completely shifting back, right? This idea that if we just, get rid of all economic controls between countries, there'll be this great trade lifts all boats, and there's world peace and everything because everybody's trading with it. Of course, we've seen the fact that we're so reliant on China for our supply chains is a problem, right. Number one, and it certainly hasn't prevented that relationship from escalating. Yes. So a lot of people are starting to, and this was something that Trump really kind of leaned into, I think, a bit before his time, is he understood that people felt the world order that everyone had kind of signed up to for about 80 years wasn't really working for them and wasn't working for the normal person. Now, I disagree with a lot of stuff that Trump did and kind of stands for, but he was, one of the reasons I think he was so impactful is because he was really, understanding this fact that a lot of people, he tapped into it, and there's not a lot of, and to my point, there's not a lot of content out there, or not a lot of people that were kind of going out and saying that. And so, we've gotten to this point similar to what we did with Hitler, with the Ukraine war, I think, where our apathy boiled over. I mean, you had the Germans willing to buy gas at whatever price from Russia and apologize everything away. And it got to the point where we were funneling this guy, hundreds of billions of dollars a year in petrodollars, and he built an army. He ended up building a really shitty army, it turns out, because it was so corrupt. But, right. It's still a big army, one of the biggest armies out there, enough to go start a really, really damaging war. And so I think it's a lesson to kind of us of seeing, because we were so myopic and because we were so selfish, we kind of lost track of the plot and allowed this to happen when we never should have.
We took our eye off the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes, we took our eye off the ball.
What do you think is a way that we could prevent this happening?
Well, but I, in the same way, and I think I want to kind of lean into this theme of optimism. I think that I've been pleasantly surprised with a lot of people thought that they were going to drive across the border and drive into Kiev in 3 days, and that was going to be it. Right. Maybe there'd be some resistance or whatever, but one of the themes that I want to hit on is I think the human spirit is really resilient, and I think when we look at these protests, when we look at the midterm, there's something going on here where people are connecting in a way, and people are kind of sick of things and they want to shake them off.
There's going to be a paradigm shift.
Yeah, that's what I would say, of some variety.
It's starting.
Yeah, and I think the Ukraine war is a good example of actually because a lot of people thought it's gonna be fucking over in a day, and you've seen this incredible resilience, and you've seen also places like Germany and France and stuff who were deeply cynical in their relationship with this, and all they wanted to do was buy gas, and this was never going to be an issue. like really kind of step up to the plate, NATO, and be like, no, like we're not okay with this in a way that, I mean, I was shocked when the Germans right after the invasion were like, yeah, we'll shut down the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. I was absolutely, and maybe folks don't kind of understand that, but it's this
that had
big
huge like, economic
huge thing.
ramifications.
and they were building a second one, and
Yeah.
they get all of their gas, basically 90% of their energy supplies, I think. Someone can quote me or fact check me. Hopefully, I don't get flagged on Twitter for spreading misinformation, because that's a
It's alright, we won't at you. Man.
that's a don't at me, yeah, don't index my talk. But that was a big deal, and so that's kind of how I'm coming at the Ukraine war, of looking at it's almost this last kind of vestige of like this trend that we've been on, and like something, and like look, like it could end up going really badly, and there could be a nuclear holocaust, or like Putin could win and kill whatever.
But
sure.
This is the optimism part.
But but I'm reading the tea leaves in an optimism. I'm at least saying there's a lot of potential if we kind of play the cards right and stick the course.
Yes.
I also am fairly optimistic, but I also like to look backwards in history, and I know there's been a lot of times where unsuccessful missions of conquest have led to regime change in Russia specifically. And so
everywhere though, because they overextend. I mean, that's one of the problems with and this is also what you're seeing going on in China and Iran too. We'll get to these protests and both. So folks haven't been following along because there's a lot to keep up with these days. And one of the reasons that I think this is an important project is because we want to give some context for people so they know what to pay attention to and they know how to kind of connect the dots on these things.
Right.
So maybe you haven't been following these protests or even know anything about Iran, know anything about the history of that country.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me finish touching on
for sure,
Russia here, and then we can move to Iran.
Yeah, for sure.
And China, but yeah, like I was saying, specifically everywhere, but specifically in Russia, like in the past 120 odd years, missions of conquest to another country that are unsuccessful are generally bookended by a pretty major regime change.
And so, autocracies, not in democracies to the same regard.
In Russia specifically.
Yeah,
in Russia specifically, yeah. And so, there's a lot to be said about him, like about Putin really not going to lose this war, because of the potential consequences for him, not staying in power.
Mm-hmm.
But I generally have a positive outlook. I find a lot of inspiration in those folks from Ukraine defending themselves like that, and I know there's a lot of talk about our involvement, how deep we should be involved, or how not deep we should be involved. But
Yeah.
I think it's great that we can help out. I think it's it's probably best for us to not have put boots on the ground. But again, in the grand scheme of things, I think maintaining this, these new rules, these new international rules that you don't just go into somebody's house anymore. Even though places like Taiwan, places like Ukraine, by those authoritarian governments, what's considered their house and not their house is a little bit,
Also,
opaque.
Alligator, my man, you got to get in the frame. You're lounging out of the frame a bit.
Here's the deal. I'm hearing a lot of talk now. It's small, but it's growing. About we're spending too much money on the Ukrainian war.
Mm-hmm.
We're helping them too much, and blah blah blah. And that's another indication of our original theme here.
Mm-hmm.
Not thinking
Yeah.
ahead. What happens if we don't?
Mm-hmm.
What happens if we abandon now there's a certain political party who's already said if they get in office, there's going to be some changes to our aid to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do if we allow Mr. Putin to have his way? We are surely headed to World War III.
Well, I don't think that Ukraine becoming part of, again, I don't know if I'm coming off as supportive of that stuff, but I don't think that would inherently lead to that. I think that's probably everyone's biggest fear right now. Though,
The reason it's a problem, though, and then we can kind of shift to somebody, is because someone like Putin doesn't stop. Like this idea that he'll just stop when you want him to stop.
well, the problem is there's a hard line in the sand basically everywhere outside of, the Balkans, maybe, even Finland would be a really, really risky move, even though they're not officially part of NATO. But as soon as they, the Poland thing, I thought that was it. when like some shell landed in some farm in Poland and 2 people passed, unfortunately. You know, that's unfortunately they couldn't figure out where it came from exactly. Some say it was Ukrainian, but yeah, I do think there's a pretty stiff line in the sand where if it's crossed, that's a wrap.
But you know, what I think, like, you know, in bringing up the Ukraine, like we can solution and litigate the exact optimal, like should we give them long range HIMARS or whatever. Like there's all sorts of things we can argue about, but
Right.
what I'm trying to bring it up with is not to argue about any of those specifics, but more to basically put it in this broader context and this broader trend. And one of the things that I think is absolutely true, and again, you could debate like hypotheticals and wargame it, and there are folks that are more qualified than us to probably do that, and this is all they're doing right now.
Right.
But what is certainly true is that, you know, the more that we give to that darkness of someone like Putin, the more it will take from us. And whether that is land or whether that is something else, and that's why this is like such an important but also such an encouraging conflict, is like we reached a point and like something pushed back in a way that I wasn't expecting it was going to push back.
You know, I want to say something. You guys remember John McCain?
Right.
Yeah. Nukes or gas station with nukes.
We had all of these presidents that dealt with Putin. George Bush said, when I look in Putin's eyes, I saw somebody I could work with. Obama said that. I see somebody I can work with. And Trump not only saw somebody he could work with, he saw an ally in his own inspirations to be a strong man.
Yeah.
John McCain, the Republican Party went down the tubes when John McCain died because he was a lion of justice. I always said there were 2 lions of justice in the political system. One was on the Democratic side. His name was John Lewis.
Well, John Lewis is a
John
saint.
McCain
John Lewis
on
is
the
Jesus'
Republican
second
side.
coming, yeah.
John McCain, out of all of those people saying that, oh, Putin is somebody I can work with, John McCain made a statement. He said, when I look in Putin's eyes, I only see one thing. I see KGB.
Yeah.
And he was correct. And all of those other guys were wrong.
Well, if you want to give some credit to, you know, Mitt Romney too. Mitt Romney said,
believe me.
Okay, we're getting to Mitt. Yeah.
I have given credit to him, but I also say that once John McCain died, Mitt Romney even scaled back because he was at the forefront also. But after John McCain died, he scaled back also. But so what I'm saying is about this Putin guy, we have to realize his intentions. He's made them known.
Bring Russia back to its former glory.
And believe it or not, that is not going to happen in this world without World War III.
Well, so I'd like to ask. You know, you what you say, I agree with a lot. You said, you know, you give what you give in the darkness, you let go from the light. Now, would you? I mean, I really thank God that this Ukraine conflict has gone how it's gone, as it has, and you know, of course, it's needless, and none of these people needed to lose their lives, in my opinion. But it's really inspiring to see this smaller nation, you know, defeating what was recently, maybe no longer, but what was recently a military superpower.
Believed to be a military superpower. There are questions about kind of the intelligence assessments and what was going on there, but yeah.
Recently, 60 years ago, they were for sure the Red Army was the largest, most powerful land army that ever was. Before, you know, they lost 26 million people or whatever.
That's a caveat.
But what I'm trying to articulate here is as a people, as humans, we have so much to lose. What is the balance between preserving things, justice, you know what I'm saying, and allowing this sort of chemical reaction to take place that leads us to those chemical reactions that we really don't want to take place. You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we haven't had to really ask that question as a society in a while in America.
Yeah, the most recent time was I guess those boats that ended up turning around down in the down around Cuba, huh?
The Cuban Missile Crisis.
Well, there was actually a closer time.
I'm not talking about. I'm actually not super worried about the existential risk of nuclear holocaust, but I'm talking about actually having to die for a belief. That's something that we haven't had to do, and it's actually like a really interesting phenomena for society, because it inherently means that you believe in something that extends after your death, number one. And like one of the things that we started out this kind of podcast talking about is like this idea that we used to think about future generations, and now it's me, and now it's tweet.
That should be where we center things.
Well, they say our generation, which is, I'm on the border of like Z and Y. I think you're probably Y.
I'm a millennial.
Millennials, I think Y.
Yeah, I don't know the generations, but I know I'm a millennial.
So I think millennials.
I know the baby boomers fucked everything up. So.
So I think the millennials were the first generation to not be defined like by a war, right? The Gen X, I think, was it the first Gulf Wars? The one before was the like Vietnam, Korea sort of era, and then before that was World War II, and before it was 111 and so on and so forth. But the first
probably would have more said the end of the Cold War, but regardless, yeah.
But for the generation as a whole, which is, it's kind of silly and something to market to, but for the generation as a whole, it's the first time it wasn't defined by a war. When you ask people from your generation, they talk about the Great War, or they talk about Vietnam, but when you ask somebody from our generation, it's like the internet. It's maybe, if you're an American, 9/11, but like that's the resulting wars were all fought by volunteers, and it didn't affect us as a society here in America. If you were over there, of course it did, but what I'm trying to say is I think maybe a reason why we do look so small scale and so internally and so little about the future is, like you were just saying, I'm agreeing with you, we haven't had something like to think of that was greater than ourselves.
Well, we got a lot of crises going on. That's part of what we're talking about.
Oh yes.
That's part of what we're talking about. So why don't we pick a different crisis? I think we've talked a lot about the Ukraine war. So
we have climate change. The Ukraine war.
So I want to come back to climate change maybe at the end now that we've kind of talked a bit about these. But what do you want to? So Alligator, I'll throw this one to you. So I got protests. This is Iran and China. I got the economy, stupid, and midterms. Choose your own adventure.
Okay, the protests.
Let's talk about the protests.
I don't know how many Americans are aware, but what this fragile thing we call democracy, which is still an experiment, it's still an experiment, is in dire straits because there are elements, not only foreign elements, but also domestic elements, that their one objective is to damage this thing we call democracy, to damage democracy. We have politicians now who have inexplicably aligned themselves with undesirable element, Nazi type of things. And I don't think America is aware that there are certain elements, like I say, foreign and domestic, that are actively working to dismantle or weaken what we call democracy.
Not quite as optimistic as.
Well, no.
I'm just making a joke.
I am very optimistic.
I'm just joking.
Because my attitude is, say, climate change and all of this stuff. Technology from the beginning of the industrial age, it's what screwed up this planet. The smoke from the factories and all of this, this stuff that we've been doing. The water's dirty now. We've just screwed up stuff. It's gotten to the point now where my attitude is the only thing that can really save us is technology. I think we have people who are smart enough, who are working to try to solve some of these problems, and the only way they can be solved now is through technology. Technology brought this situation on as far as climate change and things like that, and a social division, all of that stuff. Technology was responsible for it, but technology is the only thing now that can also save us from it.
Assuming, so 2 points on that. I agree. And we didn't actually touch on the protests at all there, but we can pull on this thread for a little bit. I agree that technology and industrialization have consumed a very large amount of the resources of the planet to the point that we are at an unsustainable precipice. However, a counter argument that you'll read from a lot of people that probably affiliate with the other end of the political spectrum than you, and I do think it's important to have a diverse political spectrum in a democracy. You can't just have a democracy if it's like, well, everyone votes and agrees with me. Like, you need to facilitate, the attitudes of everybody, and that's why it's an experiment. That's why it's hard. Would argue that industrialization has massively improved our quality of life. Like, we're sitting here in this, beautiful little apartment. You guys drove here in a car. You were able to get so there are kind of two sides to the story there. But
yes.
Well, it's not bad. I think what Dad was saying is that technology sort of gave us the ability to. It gave us enough rope to hang ourselves, but it also can give us enough rope to, save ourselves at the same time. Like
the industrial engine, the whole fossil fuel thing, which has fueled these advancements that we made.
Mm-hmm.
Technology will also save us from that by going to clean energy and things like that. Things that will continue our advancement as human beings, but in a more sustainable way for the environment.
Well, so to the topic of, I do think that there are trends which we've been talking about. Like, everything is on a continuum. There's history before it. There's future after it. But then there are things that punctuate or meaningfully change the course. And with finite time and attention and resources, we have the ability to change things as individuals and as a society. We don't have infinite ability, but we have some ability. Mm-hmm. And there are times when something meaningful like that happens. Even like the Russian invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February, I believe it was. That may have been part of all these trends and something, but that was a news event. I mean, the fact that Russia is now across the border and they're marching on Kyiv, so there are things that come up in the news. I read a Jon Stewart quote one time. It was, the problem with the 24-hour news network is that in an average day only about 7 minutes of actual news happens. But there is 7 minutes of actual news, and on the climate change front, I mean, one of the things that does seem to be getting some of this momentum is this loss and damage fund. Are you guys familiar with this? So they had the recent climate conference, which they have every year, coming out of the Paris Agreement, where we agreed to try to limit warming to about 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is pretty catastrophic, but it's not fully catastrophic. We're at about 1.1 right now. And I mean, you can see it. Like, I drove down to LA in the Central Valley. I mean, people are at 5% of their water allocation that was set back in the 1890s or something from the Colorado River. But to your point earlier of long-term trends here and not being able to recognize them. I mean, the short-term trends are also becoming, increasingly clear. But with the climate change thing, which is one of the reasons I think we're starting to see action and see attitudes changing. And I do think that the existential nature of this is becoming clear to more people, and that's kind of prompting some urgency. It's prompting a lot of fear. But this loss and damage fund, we had the recent conference this year. Last year was the big one where every 5 years, people kind of update their pledges, and so last year got a lot of traction. This year, no one really thought anything was going to happen. And one of the other big problems with climate change is if you look, historically, at who's emitted the most greenhouse gases that have led to the situation that we're in, it's the industrialized world, right? Because that's what produced it, and those countries have become very wealthy as a part of that. And then countries that have not industrialized, that are still developing, are in the global south, and they're the ones that are going to bear the worst effects of this, both because they're poor and because of where they are.
Yeah. There is a social aspect to climate change.
Absolutely.
And it's always the poor and underprivileged who pay the highest price for it.
Right.
In fact, you can judge pollution by zip codes.
Why do you think there's so many nice trees out in Sausalito here? We got redwoods.
Well, something that's really interesting that I didn't know for a long time, but the reason why you always hear about the east side of cities, you'll hear about the south side too, but the reason why you always hear about the east side of cities is the planet rotates away from that. And so if you have
in the northern hemisphere, yeah, so
In the
all
northern
pollution
hemisphere.
is going to blow in that direction.
we would not in the southern hemisphere.
Yeah, Coriolis effect, but we can get into that. Yeah.
Anyway, where we live here, it rotates away from that. Well, I mean, it's still rotating in the same direction. Anyway, so everything blows into the eastern parts of cities, and so you see it on a smaller level even within our community, but then on the grander scale, the countries that really created all this mess profited off of a lot of it, and now we're imposing these regulations on countries that never had the opportunity to profit off of it. But
So
that's where this plan probably comes into play.
So this is the new, like, I think it was maybe 3-4 years ago. And this also, like, I consider myself a very educated guy and a consumer. And as I started to kind of think about this project and try to do some work preparing for this, I'm like, wow, like, my history is like, it's rough. Like, I was thinking, about the climate change thing, how at a certain point overpopulation will kill us. Like, that's just a fact, right? Like, I don't know.
Yes,
You could argue if the number is 40 billion or 8
the
billion.
tipping point.
We're at the tipping point, but my point is, like, no one would debate the notion that at a certain point there's too many people and you run out of resources. Like, that just is objectively true, and you're debating where you are on that spectrum. And we had this panic, I think it was in the 80s, although my history's not as up to date as maybe, it should be, although it's probably better than most people's, which scares me. We thought we were going to run out of food. We thought that literally, once we got to 6 or 7 billion people or something, we literally there was not enough land in the world to produce the level of food that was required. And there was this thing that happened called the Green Revolution. I'm not up to date on the exact specifics, but we basically unlocked the ability to be, like, I think 20 to 40% more productive in agriculture. And that enabled us to not actually be experiencing mass famines right now. If that had not happened in the 80s, literally just at the level, and there's poverty and there's inequality and there's all these problems, but literally there would be mass famines for a quarter of the planet if this Green Revolution hadn't happened. And so that's just an aside about kind of the importance of understanding history and context here, and how little we really know and really think about that, and how poorly educated we really are about some of the stuff that's happened. But so back to my original point, I think about 3 years ago, maybe at one of these conferences, they basically said, all right, rich countries are going to need to fund $100 billion a year to poor countries, to help poor countries transition to clean energy. Now, clean energy's gotten a lot cheaper. One of the things, too, that you hear about clean energy, and I geek out about this climate change stuff as well, it's not grid resilient, so the sun only shines at certain points in time, the wind only blows at certain points in time, you need power all the time, so, this isn't going to work. Maybe if you had giant batteries for the grid, you could do that. There's some work in this area, but we're not there yet, and so a lot of people in the U.S. anyway, they kind of poo-poo it. They're like, this can never work. Well, and actually, I just learned this the other day. I was at a networking event talking to a guy who works for the Italian utility, which I guess is the largest utility in the world. And he was saying, actually, that's a problem with the American grid. He's like, the amount of renewables that you can take in the German grid or that you can take in the Italian grid is far higher because the American grid is just designed really, really poorly.
Yeah.
And so my point to this is, like, when we help these countries industrialize, it actually just makes sense to do it with clean energy at this point.
Because you start with that in mind.
And it's cheaper. It's literally the cheapest form per megawatt hour. And there are intermittency problems and stuff you need to figure out, but it's literally the cheapest energy. And these are sunny places, they're windy places. You can start from kind of ground zero and actually build these societies as clean societies. So this was the funding that wasn't happening. So people weren't very bullish on this idea that really anything was going to happen here because these larger countries weren't ponying it up. And this year there's been a lot of traction coming out of it, that people want to set up this fund, a $1 trillion fund, I think, which is real money. That's $1 trillion is real money, to really help out these poorer countries. And so it's interesting to me because that's a news event in and of itself. That's a sea change. That's not where we were. And then I was just reading the other day, and I need to dig a bit more into it, that, like, they think maybe we can stop the warming at like 1.7 degrees or something like that.
Right.
Which is huge. I mean, like,
compared to the 2.5, right?
Yeah, 2.5. And so, I mean, but my point is, like, there's some trends here again, like back to the hope point. We kind of need to be on it and maybe make some sacrifices or just think about stuff differently. But even on the climate change front, I mean, there's some really interesting stuff happening.
100%.
For sure.
Well, I know, I mean, this is maybe an old statistic, I don't know how dated it is, but I believe every hour, or excuse me, I forget if it was in a day or in an hour, but I know enough energy hits our planet to power either in a day or an hour the whole, planet at its current energy consumption for
sure.
the year.
Yeah.
Now the problem with that is, 75% is covered by water. Okay, so you need 4 hours or 4
Yeah.
days. But still, it's a problem that has solutions, and we're definitely trending like the efficiency or efficacy of these solar panels,
Yeah,
for example,
photovoltaics, yeah, for sure.
are
Which are, of course, all made in China, and we have a huge supply chain issue with that, but that's separate.
But that's the separate. So I think things like the Paris Accords that can show us working together towards a common goal for the greater good. These are the sort of things that drive people like yourself to be as positive.
Yeah, well, because I put
optimistic.
it in the same way as the same thing with the Ukraine war is like there is a trend that was wired off a cliff, and it got to a kind of a breaking point, and it changed direction. Now, does that mean that it's always going to continue? Like, it was going here, it needs to boomerang. So, like, maybe we took a 30-degree turn to the left or something. But, like, hey, if we were full steam ahead off the cliff and we took a 30-degree turn, that's a good start.
Right.
You know, and there's some momentum behind it. And that's how I read the climate change thing in the same way.
Yeah, things like, the chlorofluorocarbons and ozone.
Chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, yep.
Things like, Ukraine and Russia. So, we hit...
I want to talk, and I don't know how much time we have, so we can go quick or we can go slow. I want to talk about these protests in China and Iran because I think those are pretty interesting. Yeah, what do you got? Yeah, what do you got on the protests?
Well, I do think it's really interesting.
Well, wait, your dad was talking. Yeah, let the old man speak. I love your background, by the way. You a big skier?
No.
Oh.
No.
I was like, they don't got a lot of snow or mountains in Louisiana, but. What do we got on protests?
There's two systems. The two systems that are available is how you say authoritarian system or the free will.
Yeah.
The free will, as we call it. The authoritarian system is the power that runs it is control. Control of the population. Now, people can say the capitalist system does that also. Well, of course, in certain ways, but there's no comparison between an authoritarian government and what we have here.
Yeah.
People, there's much of the world now which wants to move toward freedom.
I agree with you. I very much agree with you.
They want to move toward freedom, and they say in China, Iran, Turkey, places like that. If you give those people the option, they would all choose to be in a free country. So these protests and all these things that are going on, there's going to be more of those in these totalitarian countries. There's going to be more, and you know what? It's going to get to a point where they can't stop it. They're not going to be able to stop it, even as brutal as they can.
Because they're starting to be pretty. I mean, they're shooting a lot of people in Iran. And China started to try to do their crackdown thing.
And here's the thing: they're killing people.
They kill a lot of people.
But these people are still hitting the streets and doing it. Do you think in America, if we allowed our soldiers to go out and shoot the civilians?
We got a lot more guns too. Our civilians would be shooting the soldiers.
How many people do you think would still be out on the streets here in America after being killed?
I mean, the most recent time, the Kent State shooting, and the next day people were out in mass. But that was also 60 years ago.
Yeah, but that was an overzealous National Guard. That wasn't like
it wasn't sanctioned. It wasn't sanctioned.
Yeah, it's not state
on
sanctioned
a
violence.
scale of 1 to 10 for these type of things, that was barely a 1.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for the United States was a 10.
No,
but that's because
he's trying to draw the comparison of what these folks are.
Oh, you can't.
Big picture of the world.
Yeah.
That was barely a 1.
So you're saying
in other countries, it's nothing to kill 80 or 100 people if they have to keep the populace down.
But they're still coming out.
But so let me kind of bring this back to the whole project of the 100-year time horizon, because I like the way that you anchored it around this idea that like we used to think about future generations and what that means, and like one thing that I think we're not very good at acknowledging and kind of owning up to. It's something I've done a lot of personal work on, and it's just acknowledging that I'm going to die and being like okay with that fact, which like it is absolutely obvious unless you're a complete egomaniac, but you are going to die, and it could be now. I mean, a fucking nuclear weapon or meteor or whatever could hit us. You could die, or like you could hopefully live a long, but we are going to die, which means that like, and when we die, the world isn't going to give a shit. I'm sorry, like there are people that care that the world's going to continue. That's how life works, and we'll decompose, and our atoms will become trees or garbage or whatever they become, but that orientation implies something bigger than ourselves, that there are values, there are things that matter that are bigger than ourselves. And that orientation means that if you really believe that, like you have to be willing to die for it, right? Because you're saying there are things that are bigger than me. And it's interesting because on the one hand, like these are really brutal regimes, but like think about D-Day, think about when we invaded, and I'm not talking about the Red Army losing 27 million people and they have all sorts of crazy trauma around that, like just the Americans, like the idea that like to get into France, I think we lost like 7,000 people or something died on that one day. We sent 30,000 troops, or someone can check my numbers on that.
Well, just imagine like you're like the third wave and like you get to this beach and you just see like.
But that force, when it's motivated by values that like really deeply matter, is unstoppable.
That is the key.
Mm-hmm.
That is it. That is it. Yeah. And to finding those values these days is difficult.
But do you not think those aren't just like kind of in some ways like deeply inherent like human values? Because that's what I think is going on in these protests.
And you're seeing it in the protests.
Yeah, there's this collective thing that's like, I'm done,
Do you know in Iran what they are doing? Those athletes who refuse to sing the
national anthem, yeah.
When they get home,
they're
in big trouble.
Well, their families.
I was just going to say that.
Because they might not go home, but there's people back there.
When you have people who, if you do something, not only do you pay, but your family pays. I'll give you an example. Vindman, here in America, Vindman, Colonel Vindman, or whatever his name was, who...
I'm not actually familiar with this guy, so I'm excited to learn something new.
Someone who blew the whistle on something that Donald Trump was doing. Blew the whistle on it.
Oh, okay.
He was a soldier.
Uh-huh.
And Trump decided to have him fired. But his brother was also in the military service, his twin brother. And he had him fired too, even though he did nothing. This is totalitarian stuff. This is not.
Yeah,
just on a smaller scale.
Yeah, on a smaller. But
but
it's the same man. 100%.
It's the exact same thing. So what I want Americans to know is that there are active people, foreign and domestic, who are actively trying to destroy this great thing that we call democracy. And we need to keep that in mind.
I think the vigilance is key there, because the price that's required to pay when that gets out of hand is big. I mean, it's really big. And for us, it's not. I mean, again, like I come back. So if we kind of look at we look at the protests, right, and like literally, I mean, and it's scary. And most people can't. In some ways, to me, it's like in World War II, no one, I mean, I'm sure people were worried and sad and stuff, but like, as a country, and some of this is maybe our own propaganda spin on it, but I believe, like, pretty strongly that people were like, no, this is our duty, we're going to go do this, and like, yeah, maybe I'm going to die.
Well, before we entered the war, there was a big anti-war movement.
Yeah,
but like, once we were in it, we were all in.
Yeah,
we were all in.
So there's a question of how we got there, but we got to this point.
And once we got there, we were all in.
Where we were full send.
Right.
In these other societies, like that is the price that they're required to pay. But if you think about it, it's like that's not like these big problems aren't that intimidating if you face them together in some regards. Like that would be terrifying to be like, oh, I'm Dhani, I'm just gonna go get killed in France. But like when all of your friends, like
when all your friends are there,
it's a group psychology. It's a collective thing.
Right.
And the thing is that these governments, these authoritarian governments, like governments exist at some extent based off of the consent of the people, and like it takes a lot of pushing back when things get really bad, and if the protests in Iran are able to be successful, thousands of people will die, maybe tens of thousands. I don't think hundreds of thousands though. I think a lot fewer people will probably die, in the Iranian protests than Americans died in World War II or something like that. But it does just kind of bring up, like, to me, I just look at those as similar, and you can have this thing where a society coalesces around these values that really matter and is willing to make sacrifices for them. And when they do that, you can get an immense amount of stuff done. And we just haven't seen a lot of that since World War II. But, you know, all these trends that I'm kind of tying together, I think, you know, have a meaning.
Yeah, that's what makes me optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
And like I say, one of the things that needs to happen is we need to let the young generation take over.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know most of the leaders of the world now, look at them, they're old ass men.
Look at who's leading the protest, though.
Young people.
Yeah.
Young people.
Women in a lot of cases, too, which is interesting.
Recently somebody said something, they said Clint Eastwood made some political statement. Okay, Clint Eastwood has always been
He's what, 87 years old or something?
Far right.
Yeah, he did The Chair.
And the response to him, which I just applauded, was Clint Eastwood said, "What? Come on, the man's 150 years old.
Yeah,
Who gives a shit what he
Yeah.
says?" You know,
Right.
the old generation needs to get out of the way, and we need to let the young people take over, because your generation, Donnie's generation, those that are coming behind them, they are not at all about racism or any of the things that have been problems in this country. We have there's great hope to make America what it has always supposed to have been.
Right.
The Constitution of this country
It's a great document.
is like
phenomenal
no
document.
other document that's ever been
It's a phenomenal, and it's
in
enduring.
America, in human history.
Slight edits, important edits. Slight
And
edits.
you-
Yeah, the important edits,
Right.
for sure. And,
And-
still
and-
some misinterpretation.
And I say that we haven't lived up to that document, but as Americans, we are always working toward it.
Mhm.
The American Constitution is just an amazing document. You know,
Yeah.
an amazing document. There's never been anything like it in human history.
But yeah, it was kind of the culmination of like a few different things, but this idea that you know, we can have a place where the people are in control of the government, but you know, you don't have to go out every day and get in a forum and vote. This representative democracy that we've had that was really unique at the time. All these years later, is now the pinnacle of what, you know, freedom and justice and liberty can embody. And I think it's important that we still stand for that, because there's so much we have to offer.
Oh, it's super critical. I mean,
Yes,
we have a
yes,
good foundation.
Yeah.
Just to your point though about the younger generations, I agree with like Dhani, my friend here. He's a good man. I'll put him in charge of some stuff.
Appreciate it.
But I'm worried about the kids even younger than that, just because they're on all these phones and stuff. Like it's really it could just take a big ice cream scoop
Well,
out of our brain.
I think we can't put the airheads into office, and I don't think that would happen. But we have enough young people who are politically sharp.
Here's what I see. What I see about the phones is
I
what
don't like phones. I'm really anti-phone.
that's a good thing. But what I see about the phones
I like
is what,
voicemails though. I do love voicemails.
what I see about the phones is what they said about my generation with the TV. It's probably what they said about your generation with the radio.
Yeah, but
It's what they said about the
it's
newspaper.
more intrusive.
It is.
so
It
much
is.
more
Well, I
intrusive.
mean, you know, the TV is what killed the radio. It's way more intrusive, and so is, you know,
Yeah,
video games and so on and so
right.
forth. But you know, what I'm saying is every generation says the previous generation was old and stuffy and didn't understand how the world works, and then the next generation is full of debauchery and they do a bunch of self-destructive shit.
I'm not worried
That
about
always
the
happens.
debauchery. I'm worried about the ability to, because a lot of this stuff comes back to like the ability to have emotional and like spiritual resilience and not be like so knocked around by a whole lot of this stuff.
Gotcha.
You know, like even being able to like being like a values-oriented person is hard. It requires that you're deeply in control of yourself, that
Resolve.
you're willing to. Yeah, it requires a lot of resolve.
Right.
And a lot of the reason that I'm worried about these phones and stuff is because it undermines the development of a lot of that stuff. Because it's just triggering. I mean, and TV does too. But again, it's so much like my uncle's got young kids. He's got 6-year-old kids, and like he tries to keep them off phones, but like one of them is like deeply addicted to like literally like trying to break into like laptops and guess passwords, and like that's all he's doing all day. And it's like, these things are designed. It's like they're like mint cigarettes or something. I mean, they know what they're doing. Like they're trying to get them while they're young and get people addicted. And when your brain is still forming around that, I don't know. I'm worried about that one.
The television, radio. There was one thing that they had in place that is not in place on the modern media, is you couldn't get on the radio and lie. You couldn't get on the radio and spread
misinformation.
Flat out information and stuff, because people were thinkers back then.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm finding out, I've got lots of friends who I have known some for 40, 50 years. And the last 6 years,
mm-hmm.
they have turned from normal thinking Americans.
I had this experience the other day with a good friend of mine.
Who would question things.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Now, they don't question anything. They read it on the internet, and like parrots, they go around and repeat it.
Yeah.
Without doing any checking to see, is this true or is this not, blah, blah, blah. We always were, that was a part of education back when I was coming up.
Mm-hmm.
You check stuff. Now,
mm-hmm.
People who live in those echo chambers. I had a friend of mine from Nevada. He told me, we were talking one day, and he said, "Alligator, you have to get your head out of CNN." And I looked at him and I said, "My friend," I said, "do you ever watch CNN?" He goes, "No, I don't watch it because blah, blah, blah." I said, "So you only watch Fox News?" He said, "Yes."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Well, here's the difference. I watch Fox News,
mm-hmm.
I watch CNN,
MSNBC,
BBC, the Japanese news,
Al Jazeera,
all of them. I watch all of them because that's the only way you can be truly informed about what people are doing." Mm-hmm. And I said, if you do what I do, then you can see that there are certain media outlets which almost always lie. I give you an example. You brought up the guy, Tucker
Carlson, yeah.
Tucker Carlson was sued by a lady for defamation of character.
Mm-hmm.
And she lost her suit. But the reason she lost her suit was because the judge stated, this is documented,
mm-hmm.
he stated, you can't sue Tucker Carlson for lying because he seldom tells the truth on his show.
Yeah, I think they said
he seldom tells the truth. They set him up as a news program, but he's not. It's an opinion piece.
Right.
So you can't sue him for lying because he seldom tells the truth anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Back when I was coming up, you couldn't have a program like that.
You're masquerading as news.
The people would never put up with something like that. So some of the changes that have happened is that people have dumbed down, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think the generations have sort of dumbed down.
Yeah, well, so I think there's, it's like a headwaters of rivers, and you got like a muddy river and a clean river or something like that. And I mean, there's a collision of these trends, right? Because on the one hand, we're talking about being optimistic and this like kind of human spirit, that's making a comeback, and on the other hand, we're talking about things like, blatant lying and really intrusive technology. I want to bring up this article that I was reading this morning. So, I kind of came up with the 5 subjects that I proposed. Again, the Ukraine war, protests, economy, midterms, climate change. We haven't really hit on the economy. We talked a bit about the midterms.
Please.
So I was kind of reading the Wall Street Journal, and it's the Wall Street Journal, literally. I mean, it's, you could not say this is more about the coverage of money and what's happening in the economy if you try. That's literally what it's meant to do, and it's read by, most successful corporate executives keep up with it. I keep up with it, for work. They also do cover news very well in many cases, but I read this interesting article today, and I would say it's like somewhere between like kind of an opinion piece and a news piece, and it was I should have dug it up and written it down, but it was something like inequality is good for the stock market. Mm-hmm. And I was reading through the article, and essentially the premise of the article, which is true, is that the more inequality you have, the more wealth you have that needs to be invested in the stock market, which drives up global or drives up wealth on paper, financial wealth. And if you look at the growth of wealth over the last 20 years, most of it has been financial growth. It's not been growth in real assets. It's been growth in these financial instruments like the stock market, like debt, like various things like that are held by a very small amount of people who then need to reinvest that money. And it was funny because the article didn't really take a position on it, but if it did take a position, it was kind of like, hey, you should actually be okay with inequality because it's good for the stock market. And so I found this to be an interesting article. And I think we're at an interesting point with the economy right now because everything we kind of know and understand about it doesn't make any sense. Like, on the one hand, we have like really high inflation and the Fed raising rates. On the other hand, that's supposed to tank the labor market. You've started to see that a little bit. Companies have started to do some layoffs, but by and large, I mean, the unemployment rate is super low right now.
Yes.
So there's just a lot of, so we have those kind of things going on. We have things where, you know, very, very wealthy people are doing very well. People that are in the middle class are, you know, eroding more and more. And
the bottoms.
Bottoming out. And the bottom's bottoming out. And on the one hand, we have huge amounts of wealth being created on paper. On the other hand, we have the planet being destroyed in order to support that. So it's an interesting point in time for the. I'm curious what you. I can talk about the economy all day, but I'm curious what you guys kind of make of what's going on in the economy right now.
Well, the first thing is I think back to the 24th of February, and the things that have happened since then.
There's a war. That doesn't help.
Right. But you know, I you go to the gas station, you see these stickers. It's like, oh, thanks, Joe Biden. But you know, you look around at the global prices of oil, and you see that we stack up pretty well, actually. You look at like global inflation rates, and like, you know, we're not the best, but we're definitely pretty far from the worst. And you know, of course,
yeah,
you know, America.
Britain's over 10% for sure. Yeah.
Huh?
Britain's way over 10%.
Right.
Their prime minister got churned. Liz Truss lasted all of about 3 weeks.
Yeah, 3 days more like. But
yeah.
But yeah, she, you know, the U.S. it sets a lot of these trends, but also we are still susceptible to the waves of the world, and I think this just sort of goes back to your original point that what this whole really podcast is about is, you know, people take such a narrow scope that sometimes they just can't even look past the shoes on their feet. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you just take 1 second to sit back and look outside of your own backyard, outside of that old Facebook group that you're, you know, getting mad with your buddies about that made Meta a lot of money, you'll see that, you know...
Meta's not making a lot of money anymore. Those days are gone. Sorry, I had to knock Meta.
Hey, man, knock them all day. Knock them all day. But, you know, you'll see that if you take a step back and you widen your scope, you see that, you know, we are still a part of this greater world, and the things that are happening in America, a lot of times are results of, you know, conflicts or... you know, super PACs or like whatever the case may be. It's a lot more than just, and I think that's a big reason why we're sort of going down, but the labor market hasn't been affected in the same way.
Yeah,
it's because there's a lot of these external factors.
Yeah, I mean, it's cyclical. We're definitely at the end of a cycle. That's taken a while. I'm curious what you think, Alligator, though, because you've seen more economies than Dhani and I over here
put together.
Do you know what?
Yeah, well, we've only seen the same one too.
Well, the American economy rises or falls on what the people believe.
Hear them out. Hear the man out.
Yeah, I think I know what I'm talking about, Bob's, man.
What the people believe. I'll give you an example. We got a president now in office who is being blamed for the gas prices being down and you know, we can't get this, we can't get that. We just went through almost a couple of years of being locked down. The supply lines have been down for a couple of years. We had a big, horrible winter, which froze in Texas. All of the everything was frozen. They weren't prepared for a winter like that in Texas. They all was stopped. There's many reasons why we're in the condition that we're in, and it doesn't have very much to do with one politician. You know, but it's like you're saying, when you listen to one news station and another news station, you would never know that. Because, say, Fox News might have their portrayal of everything is the Democrats' fault that we don't have gas, we don't have this, we don't. Let's look at it from a realistic view. look at what happened.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the pandemic turned everything upside down. And as Americans, we are wusses
Mm-hmm.
because the rest of the world is suffering too. And they are all suffering worse than what we are.
Well, that's an interesting thing because on the one hand, we do have a lot of inequality, probably more than most people. I mean, like, I think in the old days, you know, after World War II, I think the average CEO pay relative to employee was something like 10 to 1, maybe 20 to 1. Now it's, you know, 500 to 1, 1,000 to 1, something like that. So, I mean, most people just at a basic level would probably say that's not a good way to set up a society. So that's one kind of thing that's going on. But on the other hand, like, you know, two quick points I want to make there. One, actually, you kind of alluded to the terrible winter in Texas and like that having an impact. And increasingly, this climate change stuff is having an impact. Like, one story that didn't get covered a lot in China's economy, speaking of economies, is totally in the shitter. I mean,
They're having lockdowns still.
They're in, I mean, talk about China's economy. China's economy, they're in lockdowns, which is absolutely terrible. And actually, I think these initial protests were actually happening at a factory in China, the Foxconn factory that makes most of the components for the iPhone.
Yeah.
But then, you know, in addition to that, they have a heavily indebted property sector. Like most of their GDP growth at this point, they're moving from a developing economy that supplied the entire world to a developed economy where you need a middle class and an upper class that spends, and that's how your economy grows. And a lot of what that spending was on, I think about 20% of their GDP is on real estate. And one of the stories that kind of slipped a lot of people's attention, some people that were paying attention, was maybe a year ago, I think it was, or 8 months ago, one of their largest construction companies basically just completely went under and missed like a payment on a $300 billion bond or something like that. Like, they're so heavily indebted in their property sector and all this. And a lot of that, is people don't want to have kids because of the authoritarian government, and like their demographics are tanking. Like, they're going to be 600 million people in 50 years.
Yeah.
And then they had a terrible drought. That was the other thing that nobody talks about. And like I believe it was the Yangtze River was completely dry.
Yes.
And like, so there are all these things that, you know, really connect.
Yes. And everybody, people's view of these things is so simple.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, so simple, and they don't look at all of this stuff that contribute to what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And to educate the public for that is a hard job because the attention span is so short.
Right.
So that's why I mean, I'm such a big believer in stories, because these are really interesting stories. And I think you know, we've maybe done, we just, again, one thing that I really appreciate about Fox News is they are so effective at creating a narrative where everyone knows how to follow that narrative. Like, I don't agree with most of those narratives, but like, they are very good at setting up the villains, and they get people hooked in. And like, even that story I was telling about China, like, there's a lot of I mean, real life is stranger than fiction, right? Like, there's some really interesting stories here, but we need to connect the pieces in the tapestries, and that's again why, like, I think this project is important to you know, take a longer term time horizon, because when you actually zoom out, there's some really interesting stuff that's happening, and we're just so much more able to make sense of things and to remember things and to process information when it's in narrative. There's biological reasons for that, but that's just true.
So we've sort of touched on climate change and how, you know, how difficult it is to foresee this future, but how we even see it today. You know, the potential future ramifications of what's happening if we don't take care of this environment we have. We talked about the protests in Iran and China, and how you know, these authoritarian regimes, that they might be finite, they might have an expiration date, and it seems like, you know, even though these affected people are being persecuted for speaking out, they're still speaking out nonetheless. And we've talked about how you know, on the rest of these lists, right, the economy, how the bigger picture affects this thing today, but now all you see is the gas prices and a picture of
we're very short term.
show.
The other point that I would make about that is just,
but
that's too short term.
That's sort of the trend of this, me listing out these conversation topics that we've touched on. How now, you know, with the way that the media makes money, with the way that social media, how you drive engagement, it doesn't seem like it'd be possible to make financial sense out of building longer narratives, more complex narratives that are more difficult and time consuming to digest, but that are ultimately a lot more effective at showing people a more holistic view of the truth. You know what I'm saying? Like I could
Put
say,
it. I would put it this way. I would say like.
well, so how would you like surmount that obstacle, right? To go
Art.
from, you know, something that's important to be consumed to something that's more, you know, manageable and more profitable.
I think it's art, honestly. Like if I had to summarize it, because there's a very high demand for emotional resonance and emotional connection. I'd give you like kind of two examples. I'd say like there's, you know, why fast food. One of the reasons why fast food is so addictive and why we eat so unhealthy in this country is because sugar, salt, and fat are things that our bodies are trained that they need in order to survive because they're highly energy dense. The salt helps keep us hydrated, and so we have a whole food industry that's devoted to making really cheap, totally unsustainably produced stuff like fast food or Cheez-Its or whatever that get very addictive, and people eat them and there's this instant gratification, but longer term it's really bad for our bodies, it's bad for our happiness. But then there's also great cuisine. There's great cuisine that's healthy, and it has an inherent quality to it, and there's a demand for that. Now you need to create the space to consume that. But that's kind of how I look at it. I do think there's a demand because I think the whole way that the system has been architected and the way that we consume this information right now is triggering those short-term biological impulses of basically fear and anger because that kept us alive. But that doesn't mean that we don't have an additional capacity. It does mean that we do need to start to create a series of products, honestly, and products in the most macro way you could apply that, like finite things for us to consume with our time, like news. Like we need to rethink the way that we consume news. We probably need to rethink the way we consume food. But it all comes down to this idea that there's this inherent human spirit that is not being that on the one hand is having an interesting moment in the zeitgeist and will respond, I think, if we create enough stuff over here just leading a little bit ahead. I guess I just don't buy the argument that people won't respond to it. I think we just haven't tried or we haven't done it effectively.
I'm with you on that. Yeah.
Write it, provide it, and they will come.
Yes.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, that's what art is, right?
Yeah. Yes.
It's true.
But
you don't see a lot of the trend for art right now is really interesting. I'm not talking about the beautiful paintings you have around or the home, but even that is something that's being almost captured and like quantified and tainted in a way. Like if you look
there's a desire to do that.
If you look at like the post like Marvel era of like movies, I think Matt Damon said it best. Where like if you're not making $100 million at the box office, like you really can't come with anything of substance. You know what I'm saying? Like you're very limited in what you can bring because people don't get out of bed for anything less than like 2 Golden Globe winners and a couple explosions nowadays. And especially when you can just watch something on TV or stream something that sits in your living room and you pay $7.99 a month for. It's almost difficult to create anything and put money behind anything that's not guaranteed to be successful.
Well, again,
would you say that would apply to media and more consumer things?
I think this is where it requires strong leadership and leadership to create and promote the institutions of society that teach people how to be strong citizens. Like you can't look at any of this stuff in a vacuum, but like one of the things that's very interesting to me is that time is far more finite than money, and yet you'll see people spending all of their time trying to make money. And learning how to effectively use your time and actually do things that derive enjoyment and create, good outcomes for the people you care about, it's a skill. And it's a skill we're not very good at as a society. But that, like, you see my skis on the wall over here, right? Like, yeah, those are some nice skis. It cost $1,000 or something. But like, what that represents is it represents this whole world of time and experience. And like, yeah, I could sit around and watch the Netflix movie or whatever, but I would be less happy because those things out there exist, and I know to go look for them. And so it's this push and pull of like creating the stuff and just drawing attention to the stuff that exists that will bring us greater fulfillment, greater happiness, a stronger society, and educating people how to consume that.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, creating something just for the because it's important, not necessarily because it needs to be consumed. You create something with the intent to create something valuable that is a contribution to society. And other people will recognize that and
create something that's useful.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
at a certain level, you have to just believe in utility, right?
Not for art though. We're talking about art.
Well, I mean, I think the usefulness of art is that it's emotionally resonant. You know, I'm expanding the definition a little bit.
Right. Well, I mean, that's fair.
So
What do you think? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we're kind of coming to the end of the sun. I mean, I'll keep going for this all day. I think we've kind of touched on these topics. I mean, the thing on the midterms that I kind of said it at the beginning, and I kind of touched on it with the economy is like, I think we need to congratulate ourselves on doing an okay job and not self-combusting as a society. I mean, and I think that I think that the midterms left me very hopeful. And again, like I happen to agree with the political outcome, but I understand that there were people that were probably disappointed with it, and that's fine, and that's a democracy. I mean, a two-party democracy is probably not the right balance, but if you have two parties in this democracy, one's going to win, one's going to lose, and they trade off, and hopefully there's an exchange of ideas and a productive, and maybe we can have a future conversation around that of how do we actually get back to having productive dialogues. Mm-hmm. But I do think that like they just kind of, I think that we should just, they were a non-event, like there was all this kind of tension and hype around
the build-up.
The build-up, and it kind of happened, and it's like, you know what, like things aren't that bad. And even with everyone's like, well, the Democrats are going to get thrown out of the economy, or out of the power because the economy's terrible. The economy's not that bad. It's
especially
really
not.
Relatively, yeah.
Once going back to the Globe and the Times, it's like different, the same subject, but different ways of
perspective. Well, this is famous.
We are not in as bad a shape as one political party tried to portray us. We're not. And the good thing is the American people saw through that. And they voted that way. Mm-hmm.
Well, sometimes you can speak something into existence, but this wasn't one of those cases because I heard that phrase a lot. There's a famous quote about seeing a picture and taking two different takes on it that almost bends the truth, but not quite. Mm-hmm. The picture is there's like a man running from another man with like some pointy shoes.
And this pointy shoes on their alligator.
Oh yeah.
This is a difficult picture to sort of put into words, but there's a man running away from another man with pointing shoes, and then there's a guy with a camera, and you can see on the viewfinder of the camera that in this, I don't know how to say it, in this like capturing of this actual story, it looks like the pointy shoe is like a knife, and the guy is running after the original guy. Basically, this is a really complicated, convoluted way to sort of illustrate
things are not
always as distinct.
Yeah.
Now, a physical, I think I've told the story before, but a personal anecdote I have that relates to this is I was downtown San Jose in like around May or June of 2020 when there was a bunch of protests going on, and I saw this woman in a car having an argument with somebody. And then I see her put it into gear and punch it through this crowd of protesters and then be pulled out of the car by the police at gunpoint, and then this group of protesters descend on this car and mess it up. You know what I'm saying? I see this happen in person. I find the video of it online because I was like, this is something that stood out among a day full of events that stood out. And then I see a clip of this video, and it's the same video from the same perspective of all these people descending on this car with skateboards and bats and sticks they got on the ground.
These are
it's like, oh, look at these.
Whatever.
Right, and then I see the same video of, they're not like the escalated argument, just some woman like punching it and then getting pulled out on gunpoint, and like, oh, these counter-protesters are violently blah, blah, blah. And like, you can, the same video where you see the whole series of events unfold, you can take clips of it and create your own narrative around that. And it's technically kind of not lying. You know what I'm saying? And so this is something that I see very, very consistently in the media. Like if you take the Globe and you take the Times or whatever, you can have the same series of events unfold, but you can tell them through make narratives of them that sort of aid different causes that you may have. And that's something that I could see an alternative news source really solving. If you look at something through the grand scheme of things, you look at the importance of things that happening 100 years ago, how they affect what's going on today. and how what affects today will affect the future, you can start to take out these subjective interpretations and really try to get as honest and as close to reality as
And
possible.
you have to be values driven. I mean, that's important, like genuinely values driven.
Yes.
Well, one thing that we were talking about on the phone is how when you really boil things down, most of us have very similar values, right? We want America to be cool. We want everyone to have enough. We want,
To do our own thing.
to be validated, to do our own thing, to be
Pretty much.
validated.
We want the best thing for our families. and-
But when you start looking at our approaches to solving these, they seem so drastically different that you almost forget that we're trying to achieve the same goal. You know what I'm saying? And so boiling it down to the real core values that we have is a really, really good way to kind of find common ground and connect and then start building solutions together as opposed to just, standing over here yelling across the aisle.
Yeah. Well, I think we're coming to probably a good stopping place in case you guys have any more. But I remember after the insurrection on the January 6th, it was actually pretty dramatic. All the Congress people, the senators went into hiding, and then they came back and they were like, "We're going to certify the votes tonight." And there were two objections, even though everyone's like, "Why the fuck are you doing this?"
Right.
But then the senators, they gave a bunch of speeches, and I forget. I think it's Ben Sass is his name. He's a Nebraska senator. I might be getting the last name wrong. He gave this 5-minute talk, and he just started kind of ranting about how we all like shoveling snow and taking our kid to a baseball game, and it was actually a deeply touching thing because it was not political, and it did just highlight this commonality. And I mean, this commonality is really the theme of all of this, and why I'm optimistic and why I think this is a good project is that we're told that there are so many differences between us, and there really are not. Yes. We're all part of the same thing. We're all going to die. We're all part of the same ecosystem. We're all part of the same society, and I think we're starting to appreciate that. So that would be my last word. If y'all want to throw anything out there for consideration, please do.
That's the reason I'm so optimistic because I see that the changes are being made, and the whole thing is taking up speed.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, the old boy network has to recede. Now, the political network that we have had running this country for hundreds of years, actually, is on its way out. But as a hunter, and I've been a hunter all my life up until I got old, as a hunter, you know one thing.
Mm-hmm.
An animal is most dangerous
Mm-hmm.
when he has no place else to run.
Mm-hmm.
And the old boy network that has ran America is on its last legs, but it's most dangerous right now.
Right. This is a sentiment I have as well. I know right before, they say
the optimism here with me
that's not
is that I see that the generations that are coming up are the generations that are going to change things. But we need to get the old people out of the way.
Not old people around. Just
We'll keep you around, but we'll keep you around.
We'll be a
You
spokesperson.
can play some music. Yeah.
So here's what we're going to do. We're going to bring you back.
Okay.
Okay, we're gonna do another one. We'll be in communication and maybe we'll meet sometime and just have a barbecue or something. Just sit around.
I heard you do good barbecues. Gene was saying that, or you were saying something about a barbecue.
Christina does pretty good barbecues. I don't know about that. But hey, Nate Kenya.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise.
But now, Dad, you got one last song for the folks?
Yeah, and
before we get into that, I know the season just passed, but make sure when it's back again, you get out there and vote. Make sure on the second Saturday.
And you gotta watch those local elections too. Those
are the ones where you really make a big impact.
And they're off cycle and they're fun.
Very important.
Make sure on the second Saturday of every month, you stop by Bonton Leroy's Lighthouse Smokehouse and see Gator perform around 9 p.m. Is that correct?
7 to 10.
7
and
to
you're
10.
at a smokehouse. I mean, that's real solid.
Come on down to Monterey and check it out. And with that, I'll leave you with Gator here.
Okay, well, here's what I'm saying. This has been absolutely a just amazing conversation. And my friend Nate, we're gonna be in communication. Like I told him, he's a part of the Alligator family now. And the next time we come back, we're gonna nail everything. Okay? This was an introduction to me, to my friend here. And I hope that all of you have hung with us on this. This one has been a little longer than our other podcasts, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. We will be bringing Nate back again, maybe in a few podcasts down the road, and we're gonna get a little more focused and do one hell of a job. I'm gonna do one more song for y'all. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go to a little bit of Zydeco. This is a little song by the Zydeco Cha-Chas. I think Nathan and the Zydeco Cha-Chas. I only heard this song once in Louisiana, and like most things that I do, I decided to do my own version of it. I don't think the lyrics I use, I don't know what he was saying, but I use his chorus. But anyway, what the heck? Here we go. Rock me all night long. You can rock me till the cows come home. You can rock me all night long. You can rock me till the cows come home. You can rock me, beauty baby, rock me all night long. Hey! Steady rock, steady rock, steady rock, steady rock, steady rock, steady rock, steady rock. One more time. Hey! Steady rock. Steady rock. Steady rock. Steady rock. You can rock me to the Zydeco. You can rock me till the four winds blow. Hey! You can rock me to the Zydeco. You can rock me till the four winds blow. Hey! Louisiana, rock me beauty baby, rock me to the Zydeco. I'm gonna say goodbye to y'all. Happy trail. Steady rock, don't you stop. Steady rock, don't you stop. Steady rock, steady rock, steady rock, steady rock. This is Alligator. This has been Alligator in Alignment. I'd like to thank my friend for being here with us, and I'm really impressed with Nate. And I'm gonna bring him back real soon. In fact, I want to get Nate back for my next climate change show. Ted would love you. So I'll have you, him, Donnie, all of us, we'll do it. We go out to Bellini's. Sounds like a party, man.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. I love Alina's.
One of my favorite places. I played there way back in the generations ago, you know. But anyway, I want to say, remember one thing, we just got through with the midterms. Do not take your foot off the gas because the opposition doesn't do that. They at work 24/7. Remember, do not be complacent. We have to protect democracy. In order to protect democracy, we have to be vigilant. We have to be vigilant. We have to remember that this democracy is so fragile that it should be protected. Here's what I'm going to say is God bless each and every one of you. Keep you happy, keep you smiling. My name is Alligator. They call me the crazy cowboy. I have no idea why. I will see you next Alligator in Alignment. Vote, 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 vote. Get ready to vote again, okay? Happy trails. Steady rock, don't you stop. Steady rock, don't you stop. Steady rock, steady rock, steady rock, steady rock. Hey! Happy trails. That's it.